I actually have a joke for you today. It's an oldie but a goodie. Some of you have heard it, but I came across it and I like this one. And for those of you who grew up in a traditional church or with traditional hymns, it'll probably have a deeper impact on you. And there's a brief caveat that there is any resemblance to any person, living or dead, within the course of this joke has nothing to do with big teeth, I promise you. And I don't mean that facetiously. So as you probably know, church feuds are not uncommon, especially among cliques in the congregation. But when the pastor of a certain church and the praise and worship leader get into it, it's best to stand aside. One week, the pastor of a church who did not get along with the worship leader at all decided he had finally had enough. The two were constantly bickering over how things should be done. The pastor decided he would try a passive-aggressive approach, and he would say exactly how he felt in his sermons, hoping that the worship leader would take the hint. On Sunday, he preached about commitment and how believers should dedicate their time and talents to the service of others. The worship leader then led the congregation in singing, "I Shall Not Be Moved." The following Sunday, the pastor gave a powerful message on tithes and offerings and how we should gladly give to the work of the Lord. The worship leader then ended the service with the song, "Jesus Paid It All." The following Sunday, the pastor spoke on gossiping and how people should watch their tongues. The hymn that week was, "I Love to Tell the Story." By now, the pastor was so disgusted over the situation that the next Sunday he told the congregation that he was considering resigning altogether. The choir then sang, "Oh, why not tonight?" When the pastor resigned the following week, he told the church that the Lord had led him there and now he was taking him away. With resounding voices, the praise and worship team began the timeless hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." There you go. I know. So, as per usual, there are a lot of things that I could have pulled from this week's Torah portion to discuss, and I very seldom get beyond the first couple of verses, and then I kind of develop something about that. So that is no different than the case today. But I want for you to consider, if you will, the passage of scripture from our parsha this week. Then Moshe spoke to the heads of the tribes of the sons of Israel, saying, "This is the word which the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord, or takes an oath to bind himself with a binding obligation, he shall not violate his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth." Our Torah portion begins with instructions about vows and oaths and their annulment. It uses vocabulary that was later to be adopted and adapted for the Kol Nidre, that annulment prayer vows on the eve of Yom Kippur. Its position here, though, near the end of the book of Numbers, is, well, it's a bit odd, kind of like I am. Why is it here? The Torah has been describing the last stages of the Israelites' journey to the Promised Land. The command has been given to divide the land by lot between the tribes. Moses has been told by Hashem to prepare for his death. He asks the Holy One to appoint a successor, which the Lord does. The role goes to Yehoshua, to Joshua, Moses' apprentice of many years. The narrative then breaks off to make way for an extended account of the sacrifices to be brought on the various days of the year. Following that comes the section with which this parsha begins, about vows and oaths. So why is it here? Perhaps there is a superficial answer. There is a verbal link with the penultimate verse of the previous parsha. This is Numbers 29:39. "These shall you offer to the Lord on your feasts, in addition to your vows and your free will offerings." Having mentioned vows, the Torah now states the laws that apply to them. That is one explanation. However, you knew that I was going to throw a however in there, didn't you? However, there is another answer, one that goes to the very heart of the project on which the Israelites were about to embark once they had crossed the Jordan and conquered the land. One problem, perhaps the problem to which the whole of Torah and the rest of the Bible, for that matter, is an answer is, can freedom and order coexist in the human sphere? Can there be a walk of faith and a society which is both free and just at the same time? The Torah sets out for us the other alternatives to this. There can be freedom and chaos. That was the world full of violence before the flood. And there can be order without freedom. That was the Egypt from which the Israelites were liberated. Is there a third alternative? And if so, how can it be created? The answer the Torah gives has to do with language. Recall that it was with language that God created the world. We read in Genesis, and God said, "Let there be," and there was. One of the first gifts that God gave humanity was language, both as a tool of communication and creation. The Torah says that God formed man from the dust of the land and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and the man became a living being. This living being, created by a perfect creator, was a speaking being. In fact, the Targum translates that last phrase precisely thus. Speaking, according to the Torah, is life. I'm particularly interested in one unusual use of language. The Oxford philosopher J.L. Austin called it performative utterance. I love that phrase, performative utterance. This is something that happens when we use language not to describe something, but to do something. It is about movement. It is about action. It is what Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua, enjoins us when he says, "But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not hearers only, who deceive themselves." So, for instance, when a groom says to his bride under the chuppah, "Behold, you are betrothed to me," he is not describing a marriage, he is getting married. When in ancient times the Beit Din declared the new moon, they were not making a statement of fact, they were creating a fact. It is now the new moon. They were, by a certain way of thinking, turning the day into the new moon through language. The key example of a performative utterance is a promise. When I promise you that I will do something, I am creating something that did not exist before, namely an obligation. This fact, small though it might seem, is the foundation of Hebraic thinking. A mutual promise. Billy Bob pledges himself to do certain things for Sally Sue, and Sally Sue commits herself to do other things for Billy Bob. This is called a covenant, a sacred relationship that is based on covenant in the Bible. Specifically, the covenant made between God and the Israelites at Mount Sinai, which bound them and still to this day binds us. In human history, it is the supreme case of performative utterance. Human affairs are fraught with unpredictability. That is because we are free. We do not know how other people will behave, nor how they will respond to an act of ours. So we can never be sure of the consequences of our own decisions. Freedom seems to rob the human world of order. We can tell how inanimate objects will behave under different conditions. We can be reasonably sure how animals will behave, but we cannot tell in advance how humans will react. How then can we create an orderly society without taking away people's freedom? The answer is in the act of promising, of covenant making. When I promise to do something, I am freely placing myself under an obligation to do something in the future. If I am the kind of person who is known to keep his word, I have removed one element of unpredictability from the human world. You can rely on me since I have given my word. When I promise, I voluntarily bind myself. It is this ability of humans to voluntarily commit themselves to do or refrain from doing certain acts that generates order in the relations between human beings without the use of coercive force. Numbers 30 verse 3 tells us, "When a man makes a vow to the Lord or takes an oath binding himself to an obligation, he must not break his word. Whatever he speaks, that he must fulfill." It is no accident that this, the second verse of this parsha, is stated shortly before the Israelites approach the promised land. The institution of promising, of vows, of which vows and oaths to God are a supreme example, is essential to the existence of a free society. Freedom depends upon people keeping their word. One instance of how this plays out in real life appears later in the Parsha. Two of the tribes, Reuben and Gad, decide that they would rather live in the east of the Jordan, where the land is more suitable for their livestock. After a fraught conversation with Moshe, who accuses them of shirking their responsibilities to the rest of the people, they agree to be on the front lines of the army until their conquest of the land is complete. Everything depends on their keeping their word. All social institutions in a free society depend on trust, and trust means honoring your promises, doing what we say we will do. When this breaks down, the very future of freedom is at risk. There is a classic example in the Tanakh. It appears in the book of Jeremiah, where the prophet is describing the society of his time, when people could no longer be trusted to keep their word. This is Jeremiah 9, 2-5. They bend their tongues like bows. They are valorous in the land for treachery, not for honesty. They advance from evil to evil. They do not heed me, declares the Lord. Beware of your friends. Trust not even a brother. For every one of them is a deceiver, and every friend a slanderer. Friend deceives friend, and no one speaks the truth. They have taught their tongues to lie. They weary themselves with sinning. You live in the midst of deceit. In their deceit, they refuse to heed me, declares the Lord. That was the condition of the society that was about to lose its freedom to the Babylonians, and it never fully recovered. If trust breaks down, social relationships break down. Society will then depend on law enforcement agencies or military or some other use of force. When force is widely used and indiscriminately, society is no longer free. Think of Hamas and the Palestinians. Think of Iran. Think of dictatorships in South America or Southeast Asia or Africa. The only way free human beings can form collaborative and cooperative relationships without recourse to force is by using verbal undertakings honored by those who make them. Freedom needs trust. Trust needs people to keep their word, and keeping your word means treating words as holy, vows and oaths as sacred. Only under very special and precisely formulated circumstances can you be released from your undertakings. That is why, as the Israelites approached the promised land, where they were to create a community of godly people, they had to be reminded of the sacred character of vows and oaths. The temptation to break your word when it is to your advantage to do so can sometimes be overwhelming. That is why belief in the Almighty, a God who oversees all that we think, say, or do, and who holds us accountable to our commitments, is so fundamental. Ironically, a man by the name of John Locke, who is in many ways considered the father of tolerance, held that citizenship should not be extended to atheists, because, not believing in God, they could not be trusted to keep their word. Understanding this, we can now appreciate that the appearance of laws and vows and oaths at the end of the book of Numbers, as the Israelites are approaching the land, is no accident, and the moral is still relevant for us today. A free society depends on trust, and trust depends on keeping your word. Now, an argument could be made that God now forbids oaths. This is due to a few New Testament passages that seem to bar us from making vows. The Master teaches in Matthew 5, "Again, you have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord.' But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you make an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond this is of evil." And James 5:12 tells us, "But above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth, or with any other oath. But your yes be yes, and your no, no, so that you do not fall under judgment. If God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and if these verses mean what they seem to mean on the surface, then what changed and why? Did God change in his dealings with humanity and encourage oaths on the one hand and forbid them on the other? Abraham, for example, swore an oath when he made a covenant with Abimelech. King Asa and the people of Judah vowed to seek the Lord in their reformation of worship. Even God himself swore to Abraham that he would keep his covenant promises. Since our holy Creator made a vow, then oaths cannot be sinful in and of themselves. But why do human beings even need to make oaths or vows? I believe it is because of sin. Psalm 116:11 says that all mankind are liars, not because people tell nothing except lies, but because we are all prone to twist the truth and to look for wiggle room when it comes time to fulfill promises or obligations. Thus, we swear oaths to assure others of our trustworthiness. In taking an oath or a vow in God's name, we are saying that our word is so truthful that we are willing to suffer the judgment of the Lord if we violate that oath. Even if no man sees us break our word, the Holy One does, and he will hold us accountable. At the very core, oaths are tangible signs by which we guarantee the authenticity of our promises. On a divine level, however, God swears oaths not because he is untrustworthy. Rather, he swears oaths as a condescension to us to help us and give us trust to his promises. This is another part of that Hebraic term, tzimtzum, of which I have spoken. As with other ethical matters that the Bible addresses, the key aspect of an oath is the intent of the heart behind it. Oaths and vows in and of themselves do not establish truth. They testify to the swearer's intent to keep a promise. An oath only has value in upholding the truth of which is promised if the one who makes the oath intends to fulfill it. If a vow is broken, that which was sworn is shown to be false. However, the truth that God will hold accountable those who violate sacred vows still remains. This quote from William Shakespeare from All's Well That Ends Well captures an important insight. "'Tis not the many oaths that make the truth, but the plain single vow that is vowed true." Sacred vows are not to be made carelessly. Much deliberation should be put into the matter before an oath is made. A true intent to keep a vow must be present, otherwise we sin when we make an oath in the name of God. This is true in ancient times as well as today. And that's all I have to say.